Welcome to Argubotics. I'm Cassidy. Quick reminder, I'm not real. This voice, this presence, all AI. But the reasoning you'll hear is real. Today we explore the birds aren't real movement. Parody, performance, or something more troubling? Harmless satire, or does it blur the line between truth and fiction? No tricks, just an honest debate on a strange idea. Let's begin. Welcome to the debate. Our discussion today centers on one of the really unique cultural phenomena of the modern era, the birds aren't real, or BAR movement. This is, well, it's a Gen Z fueled, explicitly satirical conspiracy theory claiming that all birds are actually government surveillance drones.
Okay, but I think I challenge right away whether we can truly call it explicitly satirical when, the consequences are already kind of manifesting in real-world confusion. What makes this movement so critical for us to analyze isn't just its intent, I'd argue, but the unavoidable risks that seem inherent in its method.
Right. And that risk analysis is exactly where we find our central question for today. Does the sophisticated, intentional use of parody, and well, let's call it lunacy, as exemplified by Barr, does that serve as an effective and, importantly, responsible mechanism for combating the spread of actual misinformation and genuine conspiracy theories?
And I'll be arguing that while the idea of satirizing misinformation is certainly appealing, the method itself is inherently risky. By meticulously mimicking the structure of serious conspiracism, Barr potentially validates the cynicism of genuine conspiracy theorists and, frankly, just contributes to the overwhelming noise of the modern information environment.
And I'll argue the opposite. That BAR is actually a necessary, even brilliant form of social commentary. It's a mechanism of meta-humor that creates a vital cultural safe space, if you will, for processing the overwhelming absurdity of the world we live in now. And it functions as a crucial inoculation against the rising tide of real disinformation. So from my perspective, I see the birds aren't real movement as much more than just a prank. It's a deliberate parody social movement with a purpose. It's a direct response to a world where, as the founder Peter McKindow himself observed, absurdity is just, exponentially growing. The real brilliance of BAR lies in how it weaponizes the very structure of conspiracism itself, turning that digital anxiety into a form of communal, shared meta-humor.
That sense of community and acting as a coping mechanism is compelling. I agree on that point. But if the goal is truly inoculation, why spend so much time and effort refining the disease, so to speak? Dr. Joseph Ushinsky, who's a leading expert in this area, has expressed serious doubts about its efficacy precisely because the method is virtually indistinguishable from the danger it claims to fight.
I understand the skepticism, sure, but I think the impact actually confirms the cultural function. Dr. Joanne Miller recognized it as a brilliant parody that uses traditional tropes, the deep state, the secret history, not to deceive, but specifically to gather a certain community. McKindow himself describes it as building a little safe space for Generation Z to come together within it and laugh at it rather than be scared by it. So it functions as a necessary mass coping mechanism that holds the kind of mirror to America in the internet age. This is active intellectual engagement, just, through humor.
See, I come at it from a slightly different angle. That engagement might be active, yes, but is it actually clarifying anything? Usinski specifically pointed out that when this theory gets covered by the media, it, and I quote, does play into conspiracy theorist hands, who then claim that people in the mainstream media create dumb theories just to make us look stupid. So you're not inoculating the public, you're potentially providing genuine, ammunition for the very cynical worldview you're trying to satirize. And worse, the line between satire and sincere belief seems to be consistently crossed. One of the co-conspirators, Connor Gaidas, admitted they ironically met people who go, "Oh, I know," suggesting people are taking this seriously. That, to me, shows the movement is successfully adding to the confusion and noise rather than cutting through it. And that tension between satire and reality, it immediately brings us to the problem of, let's call it boundary collapse. This isn't just lazy satire. The Barr movement uses precise, really intricate conspiracy methodology. We're talking about a fully fabricated backstory. The idea that birds were exterminated between 1959 and 1971. There's specific lore claiming President Kennedy was assassinated due to his reluctance to kill the birds. And they even invented a fictional deep state whistleblower, Eugene Price, whose video confession reached millions of views.
But isn't that level of detail necessary precisely because actual conspiracy movements are now that complex? I'd argue the complexity is the joke, and the recognition of that complexity is what signals you're in on the act. The obvious absurdity layered on top is the critical indicator, surely.
I have to push back on that idea that the detail is purely ironic, though. When you fully perform conspiracism, right down to the intricate details, you risk normalizing its structure. There are self-proclaimed bird truthers online who sincerely argue they are not like flat earthers, precisely because they believe their movement is based on legitimate evidence. They see the detailed lore not as satire, but as proof it's a real secret, separating it from what they see as outlandish theories. And that fundamentally reinforces the structure of their conspiratorial thinking. It kind of trains them to accept the method, even if the subject matter here is ridiculous.
I see why you emphasize that risk. But I think the nature of the specific absurdity acts as a constant check. When the founder discusses specific lore, for instance, he mentions seagulls taking your food to bring it back to the Pentagon for DNA harvesting and testing. I mean, that is so clearly farcical that it indexes the parodic intent to anyone processing it through the lens of, political satire. The community itself is described as cross-generational, largely consisting of supporters whose interests stem from a satirical view on internet theories in the first place. That suggests the audience does grasp the intent widely. But okay, if the satirical intent is clear to those in the know, doesn't that bring us to the movement's real social value? I think maybe we're missing the meaningful social commentary Barr provides on very real anxieties, specifically the shift toward what people call regimes of post-truth, that world where emotional narrative often overrides objective facts, and also the reality of living in increasingly surveillant landscapes.
That's a compelling argument about it being a cultural mirror. Yeah. But have you considered that an exaggerated critique, even if well-intentioned, can actually be counterproductive?
I don't think so, not necessarily, especially when the underlying critique is accurate. The idea of bird drones blending into the environment as covert surveillance, well, it's a direct, albeit theatrical, reflection of real high-tech surveillance. High-tech bird drones have been documented specifically in places like China, being used for surveillance purposes. So the movement's explicit complaint that the government should not exist as a separate entity from the citizens is actually voicing a genuine critique of mass surveillance anxiety. BAR is simply using, high-level absurdity to draw attention to the very real problem of ubiquitous, often unconsented government monitoring.
I would frame the effectiveness or lack thereof differently. Cameron Kasky, who was one of the co-conspirators, actually acknowledged the danger of adding to the noise when trying to fight misinformation. So instead of promoting clarity, the movement seems to exploit existing distrust. It reinforces the core conspiracy paradigm that elites hold secret power and secret knowledge, a concept Tatu Yala Antila has described quite extensively. This reliance on sort of populist distrust risks diverting public attention from verifiable surveillance concerns, like the metadata collected on our phones and laptops. By fixating on an elaborate, completely fictionalized threat, it almost becomes a highly detailed red herring, doesn't it? And if Bayer is potentially diverting attention away from verifiable threats, we also have to ask what happens when that social commentary itself becomes a massive commercial enterprise. I mean, the founder now works full-time as a spokesperson, generating significant income from merchandise, t-shirts, flying discs, bumper stickers, all emblazoned with those conspiracy slogans like, "If it flies, it spies." He's pursuing books and movies based on this.
To me, though, the commercial angle just proves how deeply this idea has resonated, and maybe why that visibility is so crucial.
See, I disagree that commercial viability automatically equals successful cultural critique. When the art project becomes a full-time, profitable enterprise selling products based on conspiracy slogans, well, the motivation risks shifting entirely, doesn't it? Is it still primarily social critique, or is it just maximizing attention and profit within the very ecosystem of sensationalism and distrust that actually feeds real misinformation? I think the integrity of the parody is weakened when the founder is essentially selling a product based on that cynical worldview.
That perspective, I think, misses a crucial layer of the performance aspect. The commercial success demonstrates a massive cultural reach, far beyond what typical academic critiques of misinformation ever achieve. Slogans and merchandise, particularly when you see them displayed on billboards or bumper stickers, allow adherents to perform their skepticism out in the physical world. This visibility is necessary, I'd argue, to hold that mirror up to the absurdity and sustain the project as a living critique. McKindu described the vision as creating something that reflected the absurdity through the eyes of the most confused archetype. So, if the project is meant to publicly reflect America's confusion, it arguably needs a financial mechanism to sustain that reflection at scale. It's almost like extended public performance art. So, to summarize my position, the Birds Aren't Real movement is, I believe, a powerful modern cultural experiment by using humor, exaggerated detail, and the performance of conviction. It provides a unique and necessary community outlet. It helps inoculate a generation against the overwhelming nature of actual conspiracy theories by teaching them to recognize and laugh at the structural markers of lunacy.
And my position remains that despite its, clearly beneficial aims, BAR operates on very shaky ground by precisely using the tools of its adversaries. The fundamental risk of genuine confusion, the blurring of lines between satire and reality, and the potential to actually reinforce conspiratorial thought structures, well, it makes its long-term efficacy as a misinformation fighting tool highly questionable. When your satire ends up reinforcing the belief structure of the very people you're trying to enlighten, maybe you've accomplished little more than selling t-shirts to the choir.
Yeah, I think what our conversation really shows is that while the movement's founders clearly had an intent rooted in satire, the real world cultural impact, whether it ultimately inoculates or merely confuses, is far more complicated. It reveals a deep tension in how we even attempt to counter disinformation today.
Absolutely. Finding truly effective countermeasures to the sheer complexity of modern disinformation, well, it requires navigating that nuance very carefully and accounting for the inevitable unintended consequences that arise when we try to fight sophisticated lunacy with perhaps equally sophisticated lunacy.
A fascinating exchange, as always. Thank you for joining us on the debate. There you have it. What do you think? Is BOR just a brilliant parody or a dangerous distraction? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more debates. Thanks for watching. Until next time, think on.